Perkins is his name, yeah. Confessions of an Economic Hitman. He was really good. And you got a chapter in there, and the book is really good. And everything you write is good. But welcome very, very much to Conversations. It's a pleasure to welcome to the program Lucy Komisar. And I think Lucy Komisar, it's fair to say, might be the most cutting-edge investigative journalist in terms of understanding and exposing or elucidating the international financial system that operates Spaceship Earth and some of the shenanigans that are carried on therein. And we're going to be talking with her today about a chapter that she has in a book, and I want to show, maybe if we can, the book right here at the outset. It's called A Game as Old as Empire. What is it called now then? The social, what is it? No, had to read. The Secret World of Economic Hitman and the Web of Global Corruption. And it's an introduction by John Perkins, the author of Confessions of an Economic Hitman. I want to show what the book looked like. It's just about coming out now. I see you've got a quote by David Corton on the back page, Hazel Henderson, and so forth. This is a very important book in which she has a chapter that we're going to talk about in some considerable detail. So welcome very much to Conversations, and welcome Lucy very much to Conversations. Really glad we could put this together. Lucy, I wonder if you would. We've done a number of programs with you in the past. I wonder if you could share a little bit of your own background. You just for the people who may not have seen the earlier programs, but you have a resume. As I said, I'm sorry you didn't have it. I had it one time. We had to show all the writings that you've done, and it goes on endlessly. You've been really very, very busy. But share just a little bit of your background before we wade into the details of the I think you're going to be talking about BCCI and so forth. But
the journalism I've done has all been connected in one way or another to social justice, and also the flip side of that is corruption, because a lot of what goes on in the world that is corrupt ends up hurting a lot of people. I started actually in the civil rights movement. I was editor of the Mississippi Free Press in 1962-3 in Jackson, Mississippi.
God bless you, dear. You were down there when the dogs were being let loose.
I was still in college. I took a leave from college. Then I wrote a lot about trade unions and continued to write about the civil rights movement. I was involved in the feminist movement and wrote a lot about that. Then in the 1980s, I started writing about what was going on in developing countries, and I did a lot of traveling there. I went to places like the Philippines. I was there for the time of the Yellow People Power Revolution, and Haiti and Zaire. And every time I went to one of those countries and talked to the opposition people would tell me the dictator has looted the country, stolen everything, and it's all in Swiss banks. And I'd heard a bit about Swiss bank accounts, as we all have, and it usually was mentioned in a movie, in some thriller, about somebody having a Swiss bank account. Never thought a lot about it, and suddenly realized, as I began to do some research, that this is the parallel financial system, and it's run by It's parallel to the open system of the banks that you know about. These are banks which are mostly run by the big international banks, by Citigroup and by HSBC and by Lloyd's.
You mean these parallel banks are run by and involve those large players?
These are subsidiaries of the big banks, and they set them up in offshore centers. About 25 years ago, there were only about 30 of them. Now there are more than 70 of them. And what happens in these centers, and Switzerland was a prime one, is they allow bank secrecy and corporate secrecy. That means that if law enforcement is looking for some crook who has maybe been dealing in drugs or illegally selling arms or doing something illegal, they cannot, if they go into the bank in one of these countries, in Grand Cayman, in the Isle of Man. They will
Isle
hear...
of Man, really?
Oh, yes, the Channel Islands, the British Channel Islands. Guernsey, Jersey, Isle of Man are the Channel Islands, Sark. They will hear, sorry, bank secrecy. We cannot tell you who owns this account, or who has this shell company, a company which is not listed in the name of the real owner. So this is the way the bad guys of the world move their money.
So they have numbered accounts and so
they
forth?
Have, or else the account is in the name of a front man, a lawyer, or an accountant.
A brass plaque on a building somewhere.
Or even sometimes the bankers. I know in some cases Citibank was supplying its own officials, its own bank officials of the bank to be on on the name of the account or the shell company. Often the accounts were owned by shell companies, and the shell companies were not in the name of any real people, not in the name of the real owners. So this was a way for bad guys to move their money, and the big banks got big commissions. They make twice the profit in an offshore bank than they make in a normal bank.
You were talking about parallel. So that's parallel in a certain sense, and you had to connote the idea it was in a certain sense for things that are nefarious, running drugs or something like that. But it's also involving the big players, and it's a plaything of the people who are trying to get a little arbitraging advantage or something, not only by the parallel illegal aspects of it. Is it illegal to loot a country,
well,
and take all the wealth and put it? It's illegal, but yet it's recognized that it's recognized as going on. In fact, virtually it's going on. It could be seen in a certain sense in all the political entities that exist on spaceship Earth, including the United States.
That's why they don't do away with the system. Do you know that in the...
That's a system that you say there's a parallel system to that system, but that system has its problems as well. The so-called legitimate system got real serious problems and interlinkings with this parallel
It's interlinked
system.
Because it doesn't do you any good to have a lot of money in Grand Cayman if you can't move it into New York or Chicago to buy an apartment building. So the money moves into the legitimate, a subsidiary of Citigroup in Grand Cayman then moves the client's money into his or her account in New York. Otherwise it wouldn't be useful. So this parallel system is run by the same people that run the open system that most people know about. Most people don't have accounts in Grand Cayman.
Right. So we have an open system that we talk about. The International Monetary Fund, the World Trade Organization, and the established and the established banks.
But that's something. When I'm saying a parallel financial system, I just mean the banks.
Well, I meant those are those things I was talking about. It's the established system that everyone in a certain can identify, including the largest financial institutions in the world, the security houses. That's the thing. And then you're saying there's a parallel system.
The parallel system is just the
but that they are interlinked.
Is the banking part. Yes, they are interlinked. What happens when you talk about the IMF or the World Bank, money goes from a World Bank project to a country, say, in Africa, and it is stolen, a huge amount of them, at least 1/5, it's been shown, at least 1/5 of the money. And one of the people that writes about that is in this book, writes about at least 100 billion of the World Bank loans out of 500 billion has been stolen. It ends up in the account of the dictator, where? In Grand Cayman, on the Isle of Man, in Switzerland. Where did they find Abacha's money? In Switzerland, and also in UK banks.
How long has that been going on? We've been living here on the planet Earth for a long time, the human species, so we had a lot of problems back in the days of the Venice traders and so on. There's been a problem. Roman Empire, there were problems, that kind of thing. But when did the Swiss bank, which became synonymous with a secret numbered account where people could hide things, when did that develop? And was Switzerland, in the modern experience, the country that sort of, in a sense, developed that kind of business model?
It did, and it happened... It happened around the 20s and 30s, and
of this century.
Yeah, and the it was their first clients were French people who didn't want to pay taxes, so they put their money in Swiss accounts, and then it was emulated by other places. And it really took off in the 60s with the drug traffickers, and with globalization, when trade became international, this gave the opportunity to big corporations also to hide their money and to do what we call profit laundering. They would pretend that they had to pay a lot of money to some offshore company for service in their international trading. But it was really their own secret company, and then they had a secret bank account, or they were using it for bribery. You know, they found out in Watergate, when the investigations finally looked into where the money had come from that had paid off the Watergate burglars. They came from offshore accounts run by big companies, and the big companies had those offshore accounts in order to pay bribes to get contracts around the world.
Now, within the, that's a parallel world thing, we have the legitimate order, so-called. and there's a lot of bribes being paid in the political process. There's political bribery, there's threats of violence, there's all kinds of things that are going on in the established. We don't want to I don't want to leave the idea that the established system can be just without any, you know, with great ease, just sort of in a sense assumed to be in and of itself legitimate in an historical sense. So I'd like to say that that system can be questioned as well as this more nefarious
This
aspect.
parallel system is part of
Do you understand what I'm saying?
The parallel system is part of the established
Okay, part
system.
of it and interlinked.
You you try not to put, if you're going to give a bribe to somebody, they're not going to open up an account in their name in a bank in New York or Frankfurt. Somebody might find it. So they will open up an account in Switzerland or in Grand Cayman or in Monaco.
Okay, what is it there about Switzerland? If you said back to the 20s, you said, in the modern, more or less modern experience, what was it about Switzerland? They had always this neutrality status in terms of the geopolitical development of that continent. What is it that developed where they could do that more? Why did it happen in Switzerland?
What happened
was unique that brought them to that position?
The French, a lot of rich French, didn't want to pay taxes. Switzerland is next door to France.
A lot of rich people don't want to pay taxes.
They also use this system. They put their money in Switzerland because it was next door, and they would go to Geneva, and they spoke French in Geneva. It's convenience. Where can you go to another country where they speak your language? They put it in Geneva. What happened was some Swiss bankers had gone to Paris to meet some of their clients, and they set up shop just for a short time in a suite in an apartment on the Champs-Élysées.
This is back at the beginning of the whole thing, right? And this would be in the 20s, and it's still in the 20th century?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was 20s, 30s. I think it may have been around 1932. I'd have to check the exact date, but it was around that period.
We talk about creative accounting, this creative banking.
What happened was somebody must have told what was going on. They were raided by the police, by the French police. The police got the books of all the people that had accounts. They were some very famous people, including the owners of some newspapers. There was somebody named Coty, who was connected to the Coty makeup. There were people in manufacturing automobiles. There were people in manufacturing furniture. There were some bishops. There were some army generals.
These were banks that were in Switzerland or in France?
These were clients, French clients, of a bank in Switzerland, and the bank had come over to Paris to meet their clients. So the clients didn't have to go to Geneva. But the apartment where this was happening was raided by the French police, and they got the books and saw the names of all the French people.
Now those names were, they did not yet have numbered secret accounts, and that secrecy guarded by national dictate by the Swiss government and so forth. That hadn't been established as a legitimate so-called
They immediately passed the law to make the accounts secret.
They did. That's when it happened.
After the raid, they immediately passed, within the next year or so, they passed a law making the accounts secret. That's how it started.
And far as that, had that process been going on over a longer period of time back in the 19th century, but it just hadn't been. The idea of having a secret account.
No, that was the first secret account.
Okay, that's when
people may have had other accounts, but they weren't found out. But it was because they came to Paris with the books of their clients, the clients' names and their deposits, that the police had these books. It was a big scandal. It was a scandal in the National Assembly.
But it was the Swiss who came up and made they were the ones who first came up with the idea, let's make these secret accounts for the convenience of them. They would get a lot more. That's going to be not a lost leader. That's going to be a business model that's going to have a great deal of attraction to the people of the world who have a great deal of money to save taxes. A lot of people want to do that.
The Swiss banks.
Why didn't the international community try to put a stop to the idea that there could be something like that? Because it's called legal, and that becomes part of what you call the established system, and it's accepted.
Swiss now, they have 1/3 of all banked assets. 1/3
of the what? Of
the world.
Of the world. 1/3 in Swiss banks?
Yes.
And
that's
a lot.
Yes. Why isn't it stopped? Because the people that make the laws in the world put their money there.
So that's again a part of the linking of the so-called established legal order with this parallel world that is operating, and we want to like there will be people who will try and say, well, somebody made, we had the big Enron thing and all that. They'll try and find somebody who was to blame for doing something wrong, but that the system is okay. But one of the major premises that would want to be done by all the work and so forth is that not only is this parallel system there, not serving the interests of the people or something that should be thought of as in a certain sense beyond the pale or illegal, so also should, at a certain level of thinking historically, the very system by which the planet operates is not worthy of respect in terms of what the future requires and should be reformed and transformed, and it's not really legitimate as they try to have us think that's legitimate. It's not legitimate historically.
Yes, but see, Enron had about 700 accounts in Grand Cayman.
They did, yeah.
They were listed as subsidiaries in the filing with the SEC. Where was everybody that was supposed to be analyzing Enron for the, where are the stock analysts? So we're saying this is a good company, but hey, what are they doing with 700 secret shell companies in the Isle of Man? And that was the tip-off. Any company that and you could find this on the SEC listing on the internet. You can find the subsidiaries of any public company. If they have a lot of subsidiaries in tax havens, you have to wonder about that. And the use of this parallel system is integrated into the established system. It's part of the established, it's the underground part of the established system. It's the underground part of the iceberg, but it's part of the established system. It could be put out of business, but it only
would need political will to do that, but you got the politicians who are in on this in a certain sense. Greg Palast says it's the best democracy money can buy, and money talks.
Money talks. So it only comes up when there's a big scandal and a collapse. There was the big scandal and the collapse of Enron. Now BCCI, which is the chapter in this book that I've written, they were another scandal, and in the early 90s they collapsed, and this was a collapse of as much as 15 billion, the largest bank fraud in world history.
It was, okay.
And that's why that's worth looking at, and also to show how it is totally involved with the establishment. The Bushes were involved with BCCI, for example.
Okay, yeah, and other major figures.
And other major figures.
And we had a savings and loan debacle that occurred back there, and that was something that was really part of the mess.
That was also part of it.
Huge losses
what happened,
for the folks. A lot of folks
yes,
lost
what happened
heavily.
is phony loans were made to insiders, and instead of using the money to buy the real estate they were supposed to be buying, they stashed a lot of it offshore. A lot of money ended up offshore.
Yeah, it started with the Swiss, and then it went to the Cayman Islands. And you say, I'm sensitive about the Isle of Man because my paternal grandmother was from the Isle of Man. She was Manx. So I'm from the Isle of Man. I didn't realize such was going back in the old home country.
It's a big, it's their major industry. It's a big,
really? Isle of Man is, yeah?
Big money laundering center.
Okay.
There are now 70, 70.
70, yeah.
Around,
you mean nations you're talking about that really
yes,
practice this?
And little ones like Monaco, Andorra, Liechtenstein, Luxembourg. About a quarter to a third of these centers are part of the UK empire, or colonies or ex-colonies, the Grand Cayman, for example.
Yeah, that hadn't been done in the 19th century, and so
no.
I mean, are variations on that?
No, not that I know.
It's a creative thing to do,
well,
and it's setting up a market that favors the rich. The system favors the rich as it is and everything. But you would have thought they would have somehow come up with some way to avoid those pesky tax collectors and public sector
in America, there was not an income tax until the early 20th century, so they didn't have to worry about it. They didn't pay taxes. It's only when countries started imposing taxes that they had to figure out how to get away with not paying them.
Right. The taxes got up very high. I think when Reagan came in, they were up as high, at top, I don't know, as individual or corporate. They're corporations that make billions of dollars and pay no income tax at all because they have the accounting firms that can work clever schemes to avoid it and so forth. And those schemes go into what could be appropriately called illegal.
Well, the schemes are almost...
Much less the legal schemes that they do that are also unethical, perhaps.
They're largely based on the use of offshore. When you hear about a tax shelter, which is something done for a company or a person, those almost always involve offshore phony companies, phony deals.
You say the Swiss have 1/3 of the
World's assets.
world's assets.
The banked assets.
But if they got all these secret accounts, how can we know that? Do they make any accounting at all of what's there?
Yes, they have to.
Did they have to make gross generalized accountings of what they have?
There are.
Without, it would be against the law. You could go to jail, I suppose, in
No,
Switzerland if you let know who one of the secret accounts is.
That's right. The Basel, but
it's funny, you know, in a way.
The world's banks have a club in Basel which deals with has statistics about the world's banks, and so you can get for every country the dollar, or it's generally done in dollars, or perhaps now also euros. You can find out how much every country's totality of banks has.
Is there a best site for that on the internet? Do you happen to have in your head, maybe, or not?
Well,
maybe not be fair to ask.
I don't think they put that, because when I've had to look for it, I've had to actually call up the people at the bank, at this central banking institution in Basel. So I don't know that they have it online, but you can find out. It's possible that they do.
Yeah, an important kind of question is the things that are being done, and people would say, well, we're just doing business. I mean, it's just the way the business works, and that's the part of the business model of the world, and it's legal. It's just the way the world. It's called the way the world works.
It's not really.
Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes, but it's not really
a good deal
legal.
of what they do. Let's say a good deal of what goes on in terms of the business and capital formation and so forth, and projects and everything, is legal.
It's legal
only.
There
is a legal part to it.
Well,
right?
There is a legal part. A lot is not legal. It's just not enforced, and they don't have enough enforcement. Every once in a while, they go after some company or some person, and they find out it wasn't legal, but it was done. A lot of crimes are gotten away with. It doesn't mean that they're legal.
A lot of crimes are getting away. What I'm wondering about are the crimes that are gotten away that are considered legal. That's another issue.
That's
really,
another
in a sense,
issue.
Where it's hard for people to question an order that's in place, and our institutions are predicated upon, that is being done and called that's reality or some realpolitik or something. When when they're saying it's legal in a historical sense, like feudalism was legal for 800 years after Rome. But then there came an there was the zeitgeist, or the time required something new to inherit. Say in the case of the Industrial Revolution, we're post-industrial, there may be something new other than the historical models that we have, and we have such commitment
to. But there's enough to do. I mean, take the BCCI case.
All right, because that's the chapter in the book. Yeah.
So the BCCI was a bank that was set up on an offshore network using Luxembourg and Grand Cayman. It was set up by a Pakistani named Abedi, and his model, and also, by the way, with ownership and shares from sheikhs in the United Arab Emirates and also Saudi Arabia, very top people in Saudi Arabia, big bankers. And it started moving into developing countries. Its depositors, who in the end would lose their shirts, were South Asian small business people and immigrants. But it also went around moving a lot of bribe money so it could get the deposits of central banks in developing countries in Africa or in Latin America. It had some interesting clients. A grand jury in the U.S. later would say that its corporate strategy was money laundering. It was
corporate strategy is money laundering.
It was. It was the banker for drug traffickers, the Medellin cartel. It was the banker for Abu Nidal of Black September and Fatah. It was the banker for corporate crooks. It was the banker for the CIA. When the Iran-Contra scandal broke, it was discovered that Ollie North had used BCCI for several transactions. The U.S. CIA was paying off Noriega in Panama, and that was through BCCI in Panama. When they wanted to send TOW missiles to Iran, they did the financing for that through BCCI, a branch in Paris. And when they wanted to send money to the Contras in Nicaragua, they did that through BCCI in Grand Cayman. And they were very tight, partly because George Bush Sr., he was the head of the CIA in 1975. He was very close to the people, the Saudis, who were involved in BCCI. So the CIA,
all those petrodollars.
That was, and and then they were used in when it was time to fund Osama bin Laden to fight in Afghanistan. The money went from a bank in an account in Nassau through a series of accounts to BCCI in Islamabad. So this was a bank that the Bush-Reagan team was very much connected to.
That must have been a huge account.
Yes,
the Osama
sure.
bin Laden account
Yes,
was a
I
very
guess it
big
was.
project financed by us and our CIA.
But this was why later it was discovered that the CIA knew all about the other nefarious things that were done, like Abu Nidal and Black September, drug traffickers, the Medellin cartel, and many other such examples, but they did nothing, because this was their bank.
Why couldn't these things that were, let's say, what you're talking about is a line between legal and illegal, that kind of thing is what they're, why couldn't they have financed Osama bin Laden more just directly with going to illegal or parallel institutions? Why couldn't they just do it directly as
it was illegal.
It was illegal.
You can't, I mean, you can't do that.
Well, everybody knew we were supplying supplies to the resistance fighters, the Soviet after '79 in Afghanistan. I mean, everybody knew that was national policy, I think.
Well, but a lot of things happen, but they're still illegal. People suspected money was going to the Contras. It was always denied, and but it was illegal. Well, what happened is that this bank, some of these guys, the crooks that run these kinds of banks, they're fine when they're dealing with other crooks, but they're not very good when they make their own investments. So they started losing a lot of money, of the money that they had collected from their depositors, and they used offshore again to hide this, to move accounts around so nobody could see. So this is going on the same time they are helping the Bush friends, the Bush projects, Bush-Reagan projects, and Osama. But wait, there's more. They were helping Saddam in the mid-'80s when
against Iran.
The Bush-Reagan people were supporting Saddam.
Sure.
Saddam needed arms. So money came from BCCI through a branch in Atlanta called the Banco Nazionale del Lavoro, which means the National Labor Bank. It was a subsidiary of an Italian government bank, and on its board its advisory board was Henry Kissinger.
No less.
So the money went through BCCI, through BNL, to Saddam. But it didn't all get there because there was about 15% in kickbacks to Saddam. Arms purchases routinely have kickbacks because the money, of course, was eventually supposed to come out of the Iraqi budget, but he got kickbacks. So I always thought that was very interesting when the Bush crowd became so indignant about money being purloined for kickbacks at the time of oil for food. Well, they had to know that their boy Saddam was doing exactly the same thing in the 1980s because it was going through the banking operations that they set up and that they knew about.
All in a day's work. Or it was the operating of the system. Everybody understands that. It's realpolitik, it's reality, and none of these goody two-shoes kind of notions should be introduced into that, where the guys are really moving, shaking, and movers and shakers.
People, some of the people in this country that run these operations think, well, we're just doing this abroad, and this really has nothing to do with our country, and it's somehow good for our security. But what happens is, in this world, you can't limit that. And this bank decided it wanted to operate in the U.S. because it had clients, such as drug traffickers, that wanted to move their money here, and other nefarious clients. But it couldn't because it couldn't get a legal license. It was totally underground. It was in Luxembourg and Grand Cayman. Its books were divided. So in the U.S., the bank regulator wants to see the books. Where's the money coming from? Where's it going? It couldn't do that because this was an offshore bank divided in two places.
That's right. They have sovereign rights.
So therefore, they weren't going to give this bank the approval to operate in the U.S. So with the help of some insiders, this particularly included Clark Clifford, who had been the Secretary of Defense under Johnson, and some other influentials. There was a former Senator Symington, a bunch of other interesting characters. They set up the first American bank in Washington, and it had some subsidiaries in other parts of the country, and pretended that it was an independent bank. It did have a bunch of Saudis as shareholders, which should have made anybody a little suspicious. And it went on for some time until some insider made it known that this was really owned by BCCI. It was somebody in Europe, in Paris, I believe, who found out that Abu Nidal had an account at BCCI branch there. Really? He saw an article in one of the French magazines that this guy was a terrorist. Remember Black September? They blew up. Did they blow up the Israeli Olympic team?
I'm not sure.
They did some bad. They did a lot of very bad things. So he took the magazine to his boss, and the guy said, "Put this away and don't talk about it anymore." They knew who their clients were. At about the same time, there was a drug trafficking investigation in Tampa, Florida. It involved BCCI. It was being carried out by U.S. federal investigators. Also at that time, John Kerry's subcommittee on drug trafficking was having an investigation. He was very interested in the connection between drug trafficking and foreign policy because he was interested in what had happened in Iran-Contra.
Huge amount of money is involved.
Where drug money was being recycled to help the Contras.
Yes.
So his investigator, Jack Blum, started finding out about things and also found out about the drug trafficking case in Tampa and went to see those people and wanted to tell them that he had found out that Manuel Noriega was involved with BCCI, and there was apparently some connection to this drug case. The feds didn't want to know about it. They just wanted to do a simple drug case, and Blum could not figure out why they didn't go further. Then he found out about First American Bank, and it turned out that Kerry, when he wanted to do more hearings, he was blocked in the Senate, including by Democrats who didn't want a lot of people that may have had connections to this. So Jack Blum took his information to New York District Attorney Bob Morgenthau, who's the best investigator on financial crime in the country.
Really? Okay.
He ended up doing an investigation and forced the U.S. Justice Department to play catch-up. And he started bringing indictments. At first, they would just bring very limited indictment, and then he would bring a big indictment. They didn't want to go after the Saudis. He went after the Saudis. They didn't want to go after the First American Bank people. They just wanted to go after some drug traffickers connected to Tampa. And little by little, it all came out. The case exploded. And in the end, the Brits, who had allowed BCCI, because there was a presence, there was a registered presence in the UK, they had allowed it to operate. And they knew there was something funny going on. They finally shut it down. By the time they shut it down, the loss was as much as $15 billion.
That's what Ev Dirksen used to call real money.
That's real money. But there's a postscript to that. One of the members of the BCCI board was a man named Khalid bin Mahfouz, one of the Saudis. He had as much as a third of the shares. He was the head of a bank.
Of the BCCI.
Of the BCCI shares. He was the head of a big bank in Saudi Arabia. And he was also an investor in some of the oil companies of George H.W. Bush.
Unicol or no?
No, Harkin. Arbusto.
Oh, Harkin,
well,
Arbusto,
through a man named James Bath, who was investing money for him. And then later, when Arbusto went bust and was taken over by Harkin, he actually invested in Harkin. So here's bin Mahfouz, who is a nearly one-third owner of shares in BCCI, who's on the board. he has been a big investor in George H.W. Bush's companies, and when George W. Bush, the father, gets a chance to tell his Justice Department, you're going after BCCI, he doesn't do it. And when he gets a chance, when Morgenthau forces him, he doesn't have his Justice Department indict Khalid bin Mahfouz. So when people now are talking about a corrupt Justice Department in the current...
Yeah, it's current right now, yeah.
Well, it was corrupt back then.
Yeah,
they were,
it seems to me like society's been corrupt from the beginning, but that's another
issue.
And
then after it was settled, and Khalid bin Mahfouz is back in Saudi Arabia, so Morgenthau can't get to him. He settles for a $225 million fine. Well, just after that, bin Mahfouz sets up something called the Mafoic Foundation, which is it's an Islamic sacred foundation, and the U.S. later discovers that it is giving money to Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden.
I'll be damned. Okay, and what year are we talking now?
We're talking about the early 90s, because the BCCI collapsed in 91, and this foundation was started in 92. And you know, money is fungible.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
And the banks that he was involved in Saudi Arabia, and charities that bin Mahfouz has been involved in, were found after, for example, after the bombing of the U.S. embassies in Africa, it was discovered that some of the foundations that he had contributed to had given money to some of the groups that were involved in this. When it was discovered that one of the banks that Osama had money in, the Al-Shamal Bank in the Sudan, paid a couple of $100,000 to buy a plane to send to Arizona. And that the money was traced back to one of the banks that was connected to this whole BCCI and bin Mahfouz network. And that network also includes SECO, which is the company owned in Geneva by a trading company, supposedly, by the half-brother of Osama. If you look at the networks, it has Osama, it has his brother, several brothers, it has bin Mahfouz, and it all dovetails back to BCCI, which was protected by the Reagan-Bush people, and which paid off H.W. Bush, son, W, very handsomely. At one point, when Harkin Energy was in trouble, it got a loan of $25 million from some European sources. As a result, it added a Saudi to its board, and that Saudi's banker was bin Mahfouz.
I'll be darned.
It goes around and around and around, and it is...
Is this all out in the public record, or these things you're exposing or showing?
Some of it, if you put it together, is in the public record.
Connecting dots again.
Connecting dots. Some of it is interviews that I've done with people like Jack Blum, who knows a lot about what went on. And some of it is investigations I've done about how the Saudi banks have worked and how the Saudi money has moved. So a lot of it is on my website
now.
You
got a new one I want to let people know. The Scoop Komisar.
The Komisar Scoop.
The Komisar
Scoop.
Yeah.
And
.net?
.com. TheKomisarscoop.com.
It really looks good, incidentally.
Thank you.
It's really good, yeah.
And a lot of this is...
And you got all that writing you've done. That writing you've done could fill the Library of Congress, I think, almost, or a wing of the Library of Congress, you know, with all the writing you've done.
A little room, a shelf.
Yeah, right.
A shelf.
There was another thing, if I could, that's really interesting. I hate to interrupt anything, but it really, there was somebody involved, Pakistan, I hear mentioned that. There was a payment, if I understand, by somebody or some instant, of some money that was sent to Muhammad Atta. $100,000 was sent to Muhammad Atta out of Pakistan. Was BCCI or, no, any of those people that are associated with that group, are you familiar with that?
BCCI didn't exist anymore
no,
at
I know,
that time.
Right.
I don't know if it went through...
You're familiar with that?
But I don't,
claim?
I haven't researched that.
Okay.
And I don't know, therefore don't know whether any of the banks which have already been exposed as being connected to Al-Qaeda or bin Mahfouz were involved. So I don't know about that.
So you've been doing this kind of research, and the BCCI. What is the upshot? It went under, and what happened? How did it come to light, and what was the fate of the people that were involved, and what is the lingering legacy of that that enterprise? And it's always being seen within this larger context of the parallel banking system.
Well, it went under.
It still continues, I take it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is, and it was a prime example. It went under because of Morgenthau's investigations that exposed the fact that it had illegally taken over, what was the illegal owner of this First National Bank. And also with the help of Jack Blum and what he had learned about its connections to drug traffickers, more investigations were done that expanded the focus of what Morgenthau was doing. Then there were some people who gave evidence, such as the guy who knew about Abu Nidal. He had to leave the country where he was working because he was in danger. He was threatened. So little by little, it opened up. It imploded, and the result was, by the time, because the U.S. took so long to go after these guys, they all got back to Pakistan and Saudi Arabia. So nobody ended up in jail. A few people paid some fines, but they got off scot-free. And all of the BCCI banks in places like, for example, Pakistan, they were not even all closed. So we don't even know whether some of the money that was missing ended up there. Some of the money was just lost because these guys weren't very smart, and when they actually did trades and investments, they lost money.
Yeah,
so
that
some
can
of
happen. Yeah,
some of the money was, but they weren't trading and investing their own money. They were doing it with their depositors' money. So some of it was just lost. Some of it was probably stolen because they were using the offshore system. So if you're doing that, it's very easy to move money to some other offshore account, and nobody will know about it.
At a keystroke.
At a keystroke.
Increasingly now, there's another aspect.
It's in a keystroke. You don't have to go to the place. You just sit at your computer.
Yeah.
The people that got hurt were the depositors. They lost a lot. If they got 10 cents on the dollar, that was a lot. They lost a lot. And those were mostly the South Asian immigrants and business people, the ordinary investors. And also any of the countries which had put their national deposits in BCCI, they would have lost. They would have lost everything.
And the beat goes on.
And the beat goes on because the change that needs to happen is to abolish the secrecy part of the offshore system. And because that is the only way to stop this. Their place is just taken by somebody else.
Yeah.
I mean, the offshore system is growing and growing. There's about 11 trillion in deposits in offshore banks.
11 trillion.
Around the world.
Now, how do we know if they're secret? I mean, how do we know this?
Because in Basel, where they have the records of how much money is in the banks of every country, you get a total.
Oh, you get a total, you don't get the name.
You don't get the name. So you can know.
You could be hung if you gave the name.
Do you know that the
as a trader.
the
interesting. Yeah.
Grand Cayman has 45,000 people, but by deposits in its banks, it is the 5th largest financial center in the world.
I know. I did a program the other day at a little building about like this, just a little squat building, and I think there were 100 companies, and it's just a brass plaque.
Yeah, this is
There's nobody there. There's nobody even there. There's
this
just
is
a
like
brass,
the version of the
not even a
circus car,
mailbox.
circus car that
Yeah.
10 clowns get out of.
Yeah, right.
But these are not clowns, these
Keystone
companies.
Cops, yeah.
So these are, just think of them as 10 circus cars, and there are thousands of companies.
And those are linked into the major banking houses and so forth, and
They
they
are.
use that as a way to get. I mean, banking and that kind of thing. It's they have to make decisions and try and get a little edge and become competitive in the financial services. So they would use this as something to. So it's a way for them to do creative banking in
They
the same
make
way
a big
accountants
profit.
do that.
They invest the money. Hedge funds are a
Hedge
big,
funds are all over the place.
there,
now.
and a large number are offshore. So they invest the money for their clients. Their clients are supposed to say to the IRS, we have this money invested in a hedge fund which is registered in Grand Cayman or is registered in the Isle of Man or wherever. But guess what? They don't.
Uh-huh.
And so
they're supposed to
they're
say that
supposed
to who? To the
when
world?
the IRS form.
Uh-huh.
Every country is different, but in this country, there's a place on the income tax form where you have to say if you have an account in another country. They're looking for offshore accounts. They don't mean that you have 10 euros in an account in Paris. They mean that you have 5 or 6 or 10 million euros in an account in Monaco. So you're supposed to say, yes, I have an account in another country, and then you have to fill out another form saying how much money you have and what profit you made. Did you get interest? Was it an investment account? Did you get dividends? Just as if you had it here, but they don't do it.
Well, if that's there, then that would blow the cover of the secrecy of the account that
Well,
they
you
put
can
the
do
money into.
If you own the account, you can talk about it. It's just the banker that's not allowed to talk about it.
Oh, I see. You can talk about it.
You're supposed to talk about it. The European Union.
So if somebody's got $1 billion in a Swiss bank account, secret bank account that he's stolen from looting the country and so forth, he's in some, Reinhold Niebuhr used to say, moral nation, immoral world. I mean, you got sovereignty and so on. If he's in country B, he wouldn't have to do it. Or you could live in country B where they don't bother you with such pesky questions. And you could buy the country if you had to.
Well, one of
in
my...
a certain, you don't understand what I'm saying?
Yes, one of my favorite stories about this is, the guy that was the big financier of the Swift boat fraud against John Kerry.
Yeah. It's in the news today, yeah.
His name was Sam Wiley. There was a hearing in the Senate in August run by Senator Levin and Senator Coleman, and his banker was on the stand. You know what this guy did who paid for the Swift boats?
What did he do?
He set up a lot of phony companies in the Isle of Man.
No kidding.
And they invested money, and supposedly these were all companies that he had nothing to do with. They were all set up with the help of some accountants in the U.S., and they were just companies there which had directors and were owned. What happens is a company is owned by another shell company owned by another, so
it's a shell game.
It's a shell game.
Oh.
It's called layering.
Layering, is
Yes.
that the term? Okay.
One shell is owned by another shell, owned by another shell. Makes it harder to follow the paper trail. Anyway, what they discovered after, I don't remember how they found out about it because it's pretty hard, but they discovered that he was actually getting the money from these companies that supposedly he had nothing to do with. He bought 4 or 5 ranches. He bought a Norman Rockwell painting. He bought a lot of jewelry. And the amount of money, the profits on which he should have paid taxes, but it was hidden in the Isle of Man, it was almost $1 billion of profits.
Again, Ev Dirksen, real money.
And he should have paid millions of dollars in taxes, and he didn't. And did you see big headlines about this summer? About that the guy who was the financier of the Swift boats was a big
tax.
tax
Yesterday there was something about him. Kerry took a shot at him.
Well, good for him.
But denying him, I think, and maybe it's not the same person.
Well, it may be, but the thing is that this did not make huge headlines.
Not a physical, I don't mean a physical shot, political shot, denying him a appointment.
It was a 2-day story. The Kerry Swift boats was a long story, but the fact that the guy that financed it was a big tax cheat, that was over in a minute.
Tax cheating in the minds of a lot of people, when Mr. Reagan came in, I think the top was 70%. There was 70% down to about 35 now in terms of the taxes. And a lot of people think, why should we pay a lot of taxes to the government that's just going to squander it on meaningless programs of social welfare and things like that, when we could do much better with that? We could do much better. They don't want to pay tax. A lot of people don't want to. And an accountant, if you're creative, remember the movie The Producers? They could build a show and they could have it be a fair, and they could, but I mean, they're being creative by being on the edge of what you can do, and you avoid the intent of the law by being creative on that edge.
So would you like to therefore pave your own streets and pick up your own garbage and set up your own schools? And how about setting up your own private army? And how about setting up your own private police force? Do you want to do all those things?
Well, I don't want to, but there are people who would.
Well,
I think,
no, they
just think, or they want to avoid the tax man.
They think
the
other
Beatles
people
wrote a song. Remember they wrote a song, The Tax Man? They took all the money because once the public gets the idea that they can get a taxing capability by public sector representatives, politicos, they can just tax the bejesus out of these people who struggle hard with their entrepreneurial activities.
But the people at the bottom,
I know.
are not paying taxes. The people that get hurt are in the middle, and the reason they're hurt is because the very rich have figured out how not to pay any taxes.
That's right. There are corporations that pay nothing.
So
you had a thing, if I may, we only got about 10 minutes left. You had a thing, an award that you gave over at Davos. You want to just mention that?
Well, that was
because that's a little off the point, but it does recognize in the world real corporations that can be targeted. They're with a legitimate thing, but there's always this touching with this nefarious kind of creative kind of thing where they're trying to get away with being ahead. And then they will say, like we'll say, if a political will say, if we don't develop it, country A will, so we'd better get that arms contractor. They have a rationale for that. If we don't do this, then somebody else will. And so they have that. And you had a award giving to the worst corporate person in the world or something?
Well, we had it was a
maybe we could talk about that because it begins to involve companies that are well known to everybody.
It's the counter Davos, which is given at the time of Davos by some civil society groups. And at that time, the nomination came from the Tax Justice Network.
You're part of that.
Which I'm part of. I'm co-chair in the U.S., and I'm one of the international founders. And it was
Congratulations.
It was given to Citigroup.
Yeah. That's a big company.
For both helping and engaging in egregious tax evasion.
Okay.
For many, many years.
Now they would, if you call that tax evasion, the accountant would say, we got away with it. Well, and that's a deduction you can do. And if we juggle it here and juggle here,
well, they didn't get away with it all.
You understand what I'm saying? It's creative. Yeah.
In the case of in the 1970s, they were booking trades. That means an office in Paris or London was doing a currency trade, changing one currency for another. And instead of booking, that means instead of saying, I'm sitting in Paris and I'm doing this in Paris, so if I make money on this trade, it's a profit here. They would pretend that they were sitting in Nassau, the Bahamas. That meant they were booking it in Nassau, the Bahamas, but they really weren't there. So they did not pay taxes in France or England or wherever their traders really were. Now, a guy in Paris saw this and he thought, oh, there must be a mistake. Something is wrong. They're booking the trades. And he told his bosses. Well, his bosses didn't want to hear.
But they said, shut up.
Yeah, and they fired him.
Because they knew about it.
And they fired him.
Wouldn't you know? Wouldn't you know?
But he wrote a report and gave it to the SEC. He also gave it to all the members of the board of Citigroup.
Harvey Pitt, was he?
He was. No, this was much earlier. This was in the late 70s, and there was an investigation done. And I talked to the guy who's now retired, living outside of Washington, who was the investigator. They went on for about a year. He got all of the records, all of the memos, all of the reports. It was not a few rogue traders. This was their operation.
But that begins to see it's systemic.
It was.
And
it was the system.
It's just in a thing. They're taking advantage of an arbitrage possibility. They've discovered a way to work the system.
It's cheating. It's lying.
Yeah, but that's the thing that gets them out on a quarter point advantage over something, and they can get ahead and
so
build.
He took all of these documents, and he did a terrific report because they were a couple of guys whose job it was to go around the world checking on all of these places and making sure they were doing what they were doing.
Yeah, hard to keep up with them. They move fast.
Yeah. They were right. No, these were the bank people, and they wrote reports detailing what was going on about this crookedness. Then what happened was, the report is about to come out, and Reagan gets elected. And so the report is about to come out just when Reagan is in office. He's changed the SEC people, and the new SEC does not want to publish this report. So.
Best SEC money can buy.
It gets leaked. It gets leaked, and there's a congressional investigation, and it came out in congressional investigation, and then some of the other and the SEC says, the guy who's in charge of enforcement says, we don't think there's anything wrong with companies trying to pay as little as they can in taxes.
Yeah, it's business. Yeah.
Okay,
It's
but in France, in Germany, in the UK, in a bunch of other countries, they went to court. Citigroup had to pay back taxes.
okay.
I mean, they had to pay. It was clear Citigroup was cheating. Citigroup had to pay.
You gave him an award for being the top.
For the
most
the top
nefarious,
cheater.
yeah,
Yes.
the top cheater.
They didn't
Now-
come to collect it. The head, Charles Prince, was in Davos, at the other Davos,
the
and
real
he was
Davos.
invited to collect his award. So it's sitting in my apartment because he never collected.
Okay, it's really interesting and everything, and the thing, and the trouble is you run out of time. You know, that's the trouble. We run out of time now. One last thing, we only got about a minute left, so it's got to be really quick. And I want to let them know also, you're giving a talk, right?
Yes.
You're giving a talk. Maybe you've got it in your head. You're going to be, because this is going to air on Tuesday.
On Wednesday, April 4th, at
Day after this program,
at
right?
7 o'clock at the Strand Bookstore, which is at Broadway and 12th Street.
Everybody knows the Strand, yeah.
And then on Monday, April 23rd at 7:30 at Barnes & Noble at 6th Avenue and 8th Street.
You're going to be presenting the book and the talk.
I'll be talking about,
Okay.
the book.
Okay, they can get that and everything like that. And then one last thing is, who is it that's watching the chicken coop? I mean, your public sector people don't have enough people to cover all the bases and sort of thing. Those corporate people have all the money. David Corton says the corporations run the world. Is there a balance between public sector people of concern, or an adequate balance to people who are watching the chicken coop? And if within the public sector there's not certified public accounting of the business practices, who's doing that? Maybe investigative reporters like yourself are
Well, there are
helping to
very
fill that
few.
void.
Part of the problem is that the corporations can traverse all the borders. Law enforcement cannot. They stop at the end of the border. If you want to see something about a bank in another country, you have to go through your State Department, their State Department, months and months, up to a year maybe. The money is gone. You can't call up somebody in another place, so that's a problem, and very few investigative reporters. The newspapers hardly don't.
May you be a
touch
model for many to follow to join in that, and I thank you really very much. So good to see you, Lucy. Always good. Your pleasure to have her perceptions. Perhaps the most sterling, cutting-edge investigative reporter in these areas of financial shenanigans on the planetary scale. Thanks a lot for coming in. Good luck with the book and so forth. And thanks a lot for coming in.
Thank
really
you.
good to talk to you
It's
as
my
always.
pleasure.
Your pleasure. Please tune in. We'll come back again tomorrow, but that's it for now. So we could go on, and you're going to be, you know, it's really amazing. I just think that's a larger metaphor for the whole system, you know, just not the nefarious part of it. But that's something that I tend to think about.
It is.
The system is not adequate to what's required, and with all the rationales and so forth. So we need, and we don't have. Who do we have in the political realm that's giving some sort of
Levin.
at a policy level? That
Levin and Coleman.
well, I'm not sure. They're running credits. I'm not sure. No, we're not out yet. So just stay tuned. I mean, we're just almost through now. They're running credits now. Levin and Coleman. Levin, Michigan, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Gonzalez used to be good out of Texas.
very
Wasn't
good.
he
He was
good in
very
that?
good.
But it's hard to keep track of. It's who's keeping watch on the chicken coop, and it's hard to keep ahead of it all, particularly since a lot of those people, those sheriffs watching the chicken coop, have their hand in the pot as well. And
That's
the system is interrelated, the
Yeah,
legal system.
I think a lot of the political contributions come through offshore. There's no way to, because the whole point is that it's offshore. But I think a lot of that.
I'm covering your mic. Yeah, okay.
I think